Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. It was an ordinary Tuesday, hot and muggy, in downtown Chicago. The Lincoln Central Bank seemed peaceful, with employees behind their tellers and customers busy with their transactions. But this calm was about to be shattered by the arrival of an elderly black man, erect despite his advanced age, his graying hair and his eyes full of wisdom. He entered the bank carrying an old, worn canvas bag. The bag looked light, almost insignificant, but it carried an aura of mystery that eluded everyone present. The employees behind the counter noticed it immediately. "Look at this," a young employee muttered, barely able to suppress a snicker. "Another old man who's going to get lost here." A small group of customers followed him with their eyes, some stifling mocking laughter. To them, he was just an old man, a walking cliché of poverty and fragility. No one could imagine what he was actually carrying in that bag. The old man approached the main counter, calmly placed his bag on the counter, and looked the cashier in the eye. He simply said, "I'm here to settle my business, and to show you that you should never judge a book by its cover." The mocking laughter of the employees and customers turned to confusion. The light atmosphere of the bank was tinged with palpable tension. Everyone would soon discover that the bag didn't contain what they thought it would, and that the old man was anything but ordinary. The elderly black man, Malcolm Jefferson, entered the Lincoln Central Bank at 10:15 a.m., his canvas bag slung over his shoulder. At first glance, he appeared vulnerable, a coat too large for his size, worn shoes, and an unassuming cane that betrayed his advanced age. Behind the counter, Sarah Collins, a young cashier, looked up from her screen. She couldn't help but smile as she saw Malcolm approaching. "Oh no. Another elderly customer getting lost in here," she whispered to her colleague. Malcolm set his bag on the counter with a soft thud, his gaze calm and assured. He smiled softly, but his eyes shone with a determination no one dared imagine. "Hello, miss," he said in a calm but firm voice. "I'd like to check my account, please." Sarah, slightly amused, began typing on her keyboard, but then she noticed something strange. Malcolm's bag was old, misshapen, and seemed far too light to hold ordinary items. Another customer, sitting nearby, couldn't help but chuckle. "Hey, look at that old man. He looks like he's about to pull a rabbit out of his bag or something." Malcolm didn't answer. He stood there, his eyes fixed on the teller, waiting for her to finish checking his account. But inside that bag was much more than just a wallet or bank documents. It was an object that would change the course of this morning, and above all, humiliate everyone who had laughed at him. The tension in the bank rose imperceptibly. Every mocking laugh seemed to die away in the face of this implacable calm. The employees, intrigued and slightly nervous, wondered what this man was going to do. Malcolm, however, was no longer smiling. He was waiting for the perfect moment to reveal that, beneath the guise of a weak old man, he held the power to surprise and make every mockery regret it. Malcolm Jefferson looked around calmly as the laughter slowly died down in the bank. His seemingly ordinary bag lay on the counter like a mere accessory. Yet it contained something that would change the perception of everyone present. Sarah Collins, still slightly amused, finally finished checking the account. "There, everything's in order, sir," she began. "Thank you," Malcolm replied, inclining his head slightly. He knelt down in front of his bag, unzipped it, and pulled out a thick stack of envelopes and neatly filed documents. Customers and employees leaned forward, intrigued. "What the?" whispered a customer, surprised to see the meticulous organization of this old bag. Malcolm then pulled out a small, old but functional laptop and opened it on the counter. His trembling fingers, not from weakness but from precision, typed quickly. The screen lit up, revealing figures and financial transactions, bank accounts, and irrefutable evidence of irregularities in the bank's management. The young employee who had laughed a few minutes earlier suddenly turned pale. "WH. What is this?" he stammered. Malcolm looked up and said calmly. "You took me for just an old man. But I know this bank well, and I've discovered some practices that might be of interest to the authorities." A heavy silence fell. The employees, the cashier Sarah, and even the customers were now frozen. The old man wasn't there for a simple withdrawal or deposit. He had come to expose the mistakes and dishonesty. The seemingly innocuous bag had become a symbol of his quiet power. The mocking laughter had turned into looks of concern and respect. Malcolm, however, remained calm. Every move was calculated, every detail planned. What no one knew yet was that this was only the beginning of his demonstration. And soon, everyone in the bank would bitterly regret having underestimated him. The silence in the Lincoln Central Bank was now complete. Every customer and employee held their breath. Malcolm Jefferson, motionless behind his open bag, stared at Sarah Collins with an almost intimidating calm. "I'm going to show you something you wish you'd never seen," he said in a low but firm voice. He gently tapped the screen of his laptop. Numbers and documents flashed by at an astonishing speed, revealing suspicious transactions, hidden accounts, and irregularities in the bank's management over several years. Sarah stepped back slightly, unable to hide her concern. The mocking young employee, Tim Reynolds, paled and tried to look away. This can't be," he murmured. But Malcolm wasn't just revealing numbers. He had a meticulously thought-out plan. Also in his bag were audio and video recordings capturing compromising conversations between some employees and bank officials. Every mocking laugh, every condescending look, would now turn into public shaming. "You thought I was weak, that I was vulnerable," Malcolm continued, his voice calm but piercing. "But this bag contains everything you need to show you that justice can come from where you least expect it." The customers, who had initially laughed at him, were now frozen, fascinated and terrified at the same time. Sarah, trembling, took a deep breath. "Sir, what do you want from us?" she asked, her voice choked. Malcolm smiled slightly, a smile that reflected neither anger nor resentment, but a cold, righteous determination. "I don't mean to harm, merely to correct. Those who laughed at and underestimated this old man will learn an important lesson." At that moment, Malcolm pulled out a cell phone and discreetly called a competent banking authority, ready to intervene. The next few minutes would change the dynamics of the bank and put an end to the mockery, giving way to a humiliation no one would forget. Malcolm Jefferson had barely hung up the phone when the commotion began to rise in the Central Bank of Lincoln. A few minutes later, agents of the banking authority arrived discreetly, guided by the precise information Malcolm had transmitted. Sarah Collins, still in shock, watched with a mixture of concern and fascination. Customers murmured among themselves, casting worried glances at the old man and his mysterious bag. Even Tim Reynolds, the mocking young clerk, had gone as pale as a sheet. An officer, Mark Thompson, a man in his 40s with a piercing gaze, stepped forward and asked calmly, "Mr. Jefferson, were you the one who reported these irregularities?" Malcolm nodded. "Yes. I'm not here to create unnecessary scandal, but to ensure that justice is done." The agents began examining the documents, videos, and recordings Malcolm had carefully organized in his bag. Each discovery confirmed the wrongdoing and serious errors committed by some of the bank's employees. Tim, still shaken, whispered to a colleague, I didn't think he had that." Malcolm looked around impassively. "Remember your laughter?" he asked softly, but with icy intensity. "This bag isn't just a bag. It's a symbol that underestimating someone can have serious consequences." One of the agents looked up at Sarah and Tim. "We're going to have to investigate all of these transactions and take appropriate action. Those responsible will be held accountable." The employees began to realize that the gratuitous mockery was over. This old man, whom they had considered fragile and ridiculous, had just turned the tables in a masterful way. Malcolm Jefferson needed no threats, no shouting, no weapons. He had used the truth and careful preparation to obtain justice. The customers, who had witnessed the whole scene, applauded quietly, some in silence, others in whispers. Malcolm's reputation was already spreading throughout the bank. He was not just an old man, he was a man who knew how to defend himself with intelligence and dignity. The banking authority agents had taken control of the situation. The employees of the Central Bank of Lincoln, who just minutes earlier had been laughing at Malcolm Jefferson, were now faced with the inevitable. Their mistakes, their negligence, and, for some, their dishonesty, were being exposed. Sarah Collins, the young cashier, felt her heart sink. She had laughed at him playfully, thinking the old man was insignificant. Now she realized how naive she had been. I didn't know," she whispered, ashamed. Tim Reynolds bit his lip. His mocking laughter had turned into silent panic. The agents were reviewing every document, every suspicious transaction, and they didn't need any additional evidence. Malcolm's bag contained everything necessary to ensure justice. Malcolm sat calmly in a chair, observing the scene with quiet satisfaction. He did not raise his voice, did not seek to humiliate with words, his actions spoke for themselves. Every move he had prepared had brought the truth to light. One of the agents addressed the employees. "Those who participated in questionable practices will be held accountable for their actions. Others must take this lesson to heart: never underestimate someone, no matter their age or appearance." The tension in the bank was palpable. Some employees bowed their heads, others tried to hide their shame behind forced smiles. Customers, meanwhile, took photos, whispered, and began to understand that what was happening was far from ordinary. Malcolm Jefferson slowly picked up his bag, still with that impressive calm. Before leaving the bank, he turned to Sarah Collins and said gently, "Never forget that dignity and preparation can overcome mockery and superficiality." Then, without a sound, he walked out of the bank, leaving behind a respectful silence and a sense of a lesson learned for all those who had laughed at him. Lincoln's Central Bank would never be the same again. And Malcolm Jefferson, that old man no one had taken seriously, had just transformed a simple visit into a memorable act of justice and pride. The next morning, the Lincoln Central Bank was in an unusual state of turmoil. Banking officials began questioning employees and correcting irregularities. Customers, who had witnessed the incident, were returning in droves to check that the situation was truly under control. Malcolm Jefferson had disappeared since the day before, but his impact was everywhere. The employees spoke in hushed voices, each remembering their mockery and the implacable calm of the man who had humiliated them without raising his voice. Sarah Collins, who had initially laughed at him, realized the depth of her mistake. She took a moment to reflect. "Perhaps I learned more yesterday than in all my months working here," she murmured, almost to herself. But Malcolm wasn't done yet. A few hours later, the bank manager received a letter from him. It was simple. "Justice does not reside in fear or anger, but in truth and preparedness. Please ensure that this place always upholds these principles." With this letter, Malcolm not only exposed wrongdoing and protected the innocent, but he also left a lasting message. He transformed mockery into a life lesson, a reminder that dignity and wisdom can reverse even the most humiliating situations. Employees, customers, and even the bank's management realized that this elderly man, whom they had underestimated, had changed their perceptions of strength and respect. The bag that had seemed insignificant actually contained everything that mattered, proof that every action has consequences and that underestimating someone can be catastrophic. Malcolm Jefferson was no longer just a visitor. He had become a symbol of justice, patience, and strategy. And although no one had seen him since that day, his visit would remain etched in the bank's history forever. A few weeks after the incident, the Lincoln Central Bank was unrecognizable. Banking officials had carried out a complete reorganization, several employees had been disciplined, some dismissed, and stricter control procedures had been put in place. Sarah Collins, who had once laughed at Malcolm Jefferson, had been promoted to a position of responsibility, not only for her skills but also for her now respectful and attentive attitude. She often told new employees, "Never underestimate anyone. Even an old man with a bag can teach you a lesson you'll never forget." Tim Reynolds, meanwhile, had been forced to undergo strict training in ethics and responsibility. Every time he thought back to that day, he still felt the weight of the silent humiliation he had suffered. The laugh he had had when Malcolm walked in never returned. The story had begun to spread around town. Customers who had witnessed the incident recounted how a simple old man had exposed major irregularities and forced the bank to confront its mistakes. Malcolm Jefferson had become a sort of local legend, a symbol of justice and wisdom. But Malcolm, true to form, remained discreet. He sought neither recognition nor reward. His bag, now empty of evidence, had accomplished its mission. True victory lay not in humiliating the mockers, but in rectifying the injustice and teaching everyone a lesson. As the bank continued its operations with greater rigor and respect, everyone remembered that old man and his mysterious bag. And deep down, everyone knew that underestimating someone, especially a man like Malcolm Jefferson, could have irreversible consequences. A few months after the incident, the Lincoln Central Bank had returned to a seemingly normal routine. But Malcolm Jefferson wasn't done yet. He knew that for his lesson to be complete, he had to leave a lasting impact, something that would forever mark the minds of those who had underestimated him. One morning, all the employees received a mysterious package with no sender. Inside was a new bag, almost identical to the one Malcolm had brought on his visit, but this time accompanied by a note. This bag contains nothing illegal. But it does contain proof that vigilance and integrity must always guide your actions. Every day, your choices matter. Never forget that. Sarah Collins, now a customer service manager, felt a shiver run down her spine. Memories of that memorable day came flooding back, Malcolm's calm, the weight in his gaze, the mysterious bag that had changed everything. The gesture wasn't a threat, nor a humiliating reminder. It was a symbol, a subtle but powerful reminder that justice and respect are the true forces behind all action. Tim Reynolds, who had received his first, remained silent for several minutes, reflecting on his past mistakes. From that day on, the bank employees began to change their behavior. The atmosphere of mockery and inappropriate frivolity was gone. Instead, respect, caution, and attention to detail reigned. Malcolm Jefferson, for his part, never appeared to witness the results of his final gesture. But his influence was felt in every transaction, every respectful smile, and every ethical decision made by those he touched. The old man had proven that true strength lies not in age, wealth, or position, but in wisdom, preparation, and integrity. And so, even in his absence, Malcolm Jefferson continued to leave an indelible mark on Lincoln's Central Bank, that of a man no one had ever taken seriously, until he changed everything. Months passed, but the story of Malcolm Jefferson still circulated on the streets of Chicago. Customers at the Central Bank of Lincoln recounted how an old man had shaken an entire institution with nothing but a bag and calm determination. Sarah Collins, now a mentor to new employees, used Malcolm's example to teach integrity and prudence. Never underestimate anyone, no matter their age or appearance, she often repeated. The younger employees listened with respect, fascinated by the story of a man who had transformed an ordinary day into an unforgettable lesson. Tim Reynolds, still scarred by his past mistake, had changed radically. His mocking attitude was gone, replaced by a sincere attention to his work and a constant vigilance to never repeat the same mistakes. Every time he met the gaze of a client or colleague, he silently recalled the lesson Malcolm had taught him without a word of anger, just with truth and preparation. In the city, Malcolm Jefferson's name became synonymous with quiet but powerful justice. People told children and friends that even an old man could change the course of events, as long as he possessed the necessary courage, wisdom, and patience. The central bank, transformed by Malcolm's actions, was now a place of respect and vigilance. Employees had learned that mocking laughter could backfire and that dignity and preparedness were strengths that should never be underestimated. Malcolm Jefferson, despite his discretion, had left an indelible mark, not only on the bank, but on the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed his quiet strength. And every time an employee or customer saw an old canvas bag, a slight shudder of respect and remembrance crossed their minds. A year after the incident, the Lincoln Central Bank had completely changed. The mocking laughter and arrogance of the employees were gone. Vigilance, integrity, and respect had become the norm, and the story of Malcolm Jefferson still circulated, inspiring employees and customers alike. One sunny morning, Sarah Collins received a small package in the mail. Inside was a photo of Malcolm, smiling quietly, sitting on a park bench with his trusty bag by his side. A note accompanied it. If you receive this, it means you have learned the most important lesson: dignity, preparedness, and respect are more powerful forces than mockery and apparent weakness. Continue to act wisely. Sarah felt a deep emotion wash over her. She understood that Malcolm had not only righted the wrongs in the bank, he had also conveyed a universal message: never judge someone by their appearance, never underestimate the power of a calm but determined person. Even Tim Reynolds, who had heard about the photo and the note, felt a mixture of shame and admiration. Malcolm Jefferson had achieved the impossible, changing hearts and behavior without ever raising his voice, without anger, simply through truth and quiet justice. Customers who now passed through the bank noticed a tangible respect in the air. The employees, for their part, worked diligently, aware that every action counts and that Malcolm Jefferson's lesson remained present in every corner of the place. And in the city, his name became a legend: the old man with the mysterious bag who had restored justice to its true value. He had proven that true strength lay not in appearance, but in wisdom, patience, and the courage to do what was right. Thus ended the story of Malcolm Jefferson. The old man had left the stage, but his influence lived on, immortalized in the memories of those who had laughed at him, and who had learned never to repeat that mistake.